I felt a growing sense of alarm. I came to realize what it meant for bullying, an age-old problem, sadly,
I should have
to be supercharged by the power of social media. New, exciting platforms that, at their heart, want to help people make and maintain friendships. We're allowing bullies to take their abuse beyond the traditional theatres.
Oprah embarrassed. William rejects interview after Meghan's cheating and defends his wife. Catherine Prince William has spoken with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. In a world where the power of talk shows and viral interviews can shape narratives overnight, the Prince of Wales has made it clear his wife, Princess Catherine, will not be returning to the stage that once cast a shadow over their lives. The refusal is not just a personal stance. It is a direct response to the storm unleashed years ago, a storm that has not been forgotten, and one that William insists should never be repeated. This story begins with the aftermath of one of the most watched television events of the past decade, the 2021 interview between Prince Harry Meghan Markle and Oprah Winfrey. That broadcast set the stage for some of the most damaging accusations ever leveled against the monarchy. It was a moment of raw emotion, gripping television, and undeniable controversy. But what followed was more than media sensation. It was a wound that cut deep into the royal family. Accusations of neglect of silence in the face of suffering of questions raised about the color of a child's skin. These claims shook institutions, provoked debate, and left a permanent scar on the family's public image. For William and Catherine, the impact was direct and deeply personal. Catherine, once viewed as the steady, graceful presence beside William, suddenly became the target of endless criticism. What was intended as one family's story of survival turned into a global conversation with Catherine at its center. The so-called bridesmaid dress incident became one of the most debated revelations from that night. Meghan claimed it was Catherine who had made her cry, only for Catherine to later apologize with flowers and a note. A detail that might otherwise have been a private misunderstanding was magnified into an international talking point. And as the story traveled across networks and social media feeds, Catherine's character was questioned, dissected, and unfairly judged. William, for his part, responded at the time with only a handful of words. "We are very much not a racist family." Those words were meant as reassurance, but they did little to stem the tide of speculation. Behind palace walls, the weight of those accusations grew heavier by the day. Sources close to the couple described sleepless nights, relentless pressure, and the growing sense that they had been caught in the crossfire of a narrative they could not control. In the years that followed, Catherine endured more than just media scrutiny. She became a target of online abuse, with conspiracy theories and personal attacks spreading rapidly across platforms. Even in moments of vulnerability, particularly during her recent health struggles, those false narratives resurfaced. For William, watching his wife face that kind of treatment was intolerable. It was here, he says, that the damage of that 2021 interview revealed its true depth. Fast forward to today. Oprah Winfrey, once at the center of that explosive broadcast, has reportedly reached out with an offer, a new exclusive this time, with Princess Catherine. The idea, according to sources, was to give the Princess of Wales the opportunity to share her truth to counterbalance the claims made years earlier, and perhaps even to heal some of the rift left behind. But William's response was swift and unyielding. Reports indicate that he sees no benefit in reopening those wounds, no redemption in offering a platform to someone who, in his view, already played a part in fueling misinformation. His words, sharp and unmistakable, are said to be, "It is far too late for apologies. My wife does not wish to speak with her, and she never will." This was not the diplomatic language of palace statements. This was a husband drawing a clear line, both for his wife's dignity and for the integrity of his family. In a climate where every appearance, every comment, every interview can spiral into global headlines, William's refusal is more than a rejection of Oprah. It is a rejection of the cycle of spectacle itself. And yet, beyond the words, lies the deeper significance. By denying the offer, William is sending a message to the world about the future of the monarchy under his watch. It is a future where privacy, respect, and control of the narrative are no longer surrendered to external forces. It is a stance that breaks with the tradition of playing along with the press, a stance that asserts the family's right to protect itself against the relentless churn of scandal. The question that remains is whether this refusal marks a turning point. For William, the moment seems less about confrontation with the past and more about safeguarding the present. For Catherine, it is the assurance that she will not be pulled back into a stage she never asked to stand on. And for the public, it is a reminder that behind the glitter of royalty lies the reality of human relationships fraught with betrayal, but also fortified by loyalty. As the story unfolds, one fact is clear in this chapter of the royal saga: it is William who holds the final word. The story follows the first news about the royal family being blown up and spread across the newspapers, creating an unprecedented wave of attention. At this stage, the mainstream media, social media, and even the forces behind it all joined in turning the story from a few small pieces of news into a fierce public opinion battle. Immediately after a tabloid published its first article about the royal family's internal division over power, a series of different news channels began to join in. Some channels followed the trend, exaggerating every detail to attract views. Others tried to maintain a neutral stance, but their silence or indecision also made readers suspicious. On social networks, millions of accounts, from fan pages to commentators, put forward a series of hypotheses. A tweet of only 140 characters, but hinting at conflicts between high-ranking members of the royal family, quickly attracted more than 1 million shares within 24 hours. This chaos made it difficult for the public to distinguish between truth and falsehood. In particular, many international media channels also participated in the exploitation, leading to information about the royal family no longer being limited to the scope of a single country, but spreading globally. Inside the palace, hidden factions began to emerge. Some figures tried to maintain a stable image, supporting the king and calling for silence in the face of turmoil, but others quietly took advantage of the media wave to enhance their position. The secret meetings and whispers in the long corridors of the palace became endless topics for journalists to hunt for information. A conversation between a courtier and an advisor was revealed. "If we do nothing, the public will believe what they read. But if we act wrongly, we will confirm their suspicions." This is the dilemma where every step carries the risk of losing control. Outside the palace, a fiercer battle is taking place. Major media groups not only report, but also secretly cooperate with interest groups. Some newspapers are even funded to orient public opinion in a way that is unfavorable to the royal family in order to create political pressure. For example, a leading newspaper published a series of articles, "The Image of the Royal Family in an Age of Decline," accompanied by survey data that was said to have been collected from thousands of citizens. But analysts realized that the survey numbers were manipulated. International television channels continuously invited analysts, lawyers, and even former royal officials to appear on air, creating a noisy and endless debate. People used to seeing the royal family in a solemn and distant image suddenly witnessed the everyday life stories and internal conflicts being exposed. They were both curious and excited, but also gradually lost faith. A sociological study published at that time showed that within 3 weeks, the level of trust in the royal family dropped from 68% to only 42%. This was an unprecedented shock. On the internet, the hashtags became global trends. People no longer cared whether the story was true or not, but only cared whether it was interesting and dramatic. In the face of the crisis, the royal family was forced to speak out. An official spokesman appeared on national television asserting the royal family remains united and focused on its responsibility to the country. However, the stiff and unemotional tone of the statement didn't convince the public. On the contrary, this appearance raised many questions. If there was no crisis, why bother to speak out, to reassure? Some younger members of the royal family who are closer to the public began using social media to post images of their daily lives. They appeared in charity activities, playing with children, chatting with the people. This was considered a soft strategy to regain public affection. But analysts pointed out that the difference in approach between the older and younger generations of the royal family revealed a lack of unity in the communication strategy. As the world watched, another information explosion occurred. A series of internal emails were leaked, including passages that hinted at fierce disagreements among members of the royal family. Before they could verify their authenticity, the media outlets exploited them, sensationalizing them, turning them into irrefutable evidence. These emails caused a stir both inside and outside the palace. The public was divided. One side believed it was true, the other believed it was a smear campaign. Cybersecurity experts were called in to investigate. But the results only added to the confusion. There were signs that the emails had been edited, but it was impossible to prove that the entire thing was fake. The royal family was caught in a dilemma. If they remained silent, they would automatically admit it. If they denied it, they would have to present evidence, something they could not fully disclose because it involved internal secrets. 7. Consequences and changes in public opinion. The whole country seemed to fall into a state of mutual suspicion. People talked in cafes, on the streets, in online forums. Every action and word of the royal family members was scrutinized in every detail. A frown, a glance, an absence at a public event, all became signs for the press to analyze. In the intellectual class, many scholars began to question the true role of the royal family in modern society. There were conferences held where people discussed whether the monarchy was still appropriate. Meanwhile, opposition political forces quietly took advantage of the crisis to call for reform, even proposing to reduce the power of the royal family. Behind the scenes, a few mysterious figures are said to be manipulating the entire media campaign. Anonymous phone calls reports sent to the newsroom, short clips that appear at just the right time. All suggest an invisible hand is guiding the story. A veteran journalist exclaimed in a closed-door newsroom meeting, "We are no longer reporting the news, but are caught up in a game of power. The question is, who are the real players and who are just pawns?" The story reaches its climax with truth and lies blurring, public distrust breaking, and the royal family caught in a media maze. A storm is brewing, and who is behind it remains a mystery. The night in London was heavy with a quiet unease. The monarchy's gilded walls, centuries old, seemed to thrum with whispers of uncertainty. In the previous weeks, what began as the shadow of scandal had grown into a storm of suspicion. The press sharpened their words. Politicians maneuvered silently, and the public, ever curious, fed hungrily on rumors. At Buckingham Palace, a late meeting convened in one of the smaller drawing rooms. The room was elegant, but intimate, meant for private conversations rather than ceremonial gatherings. Prince Edward sat at the head of the table, his eyes dark with worry. Across from him sat Lady Catherine Harrows, the palace's chief communications advisor, and Lord Alistair Pembroke, a discreet but powerful figure whose ties to the intelligence services were stronger than he would admit aloud. "We cannot contain this much longer." Lady Catherine said, her voice low but firm. "The media has shifted from speculation to outright accusation. Every headline now carries the scent of treason, of foreign influence. They're painting the crown as compromised." Edward clenched his jaw. "And what of the investigation? Where are the assurances that this fabrication, or whatever it may be, will be exposed as such?" Lord Pembroke folded his hands. "That is precisely the problem, Your Highness. It is no longer clear what is fabrication and what is truth. There are funds transfers and connections that even our most loyal allies in Parliament are struggling to defend." Edward leaned back, exhaling sharply. The pressure of centuries pressed upon his shoulders. He was no stranger to scandal, but this was existential. If the crown were seen as corrupted, not by weakness or misjudgment, but by the influence of hostile powers, the very foundation of the monarchy could crack. We must shape the narrative before it shapes us, Lady Catherine pressed on. If we do not, they will turn this into a trial of monarchy itself, and there are many who would gladly see it ended. Silence followed. The implication hung heavy in the air. Republican sentiments once fringe were gaining momentum. Edward broke the silence. And what of my cousin James? He has been uncharacteristically quiet. That troubles me. Lord Pembroke's gaze flickered. James is clever, but his silence could mean calculation. He has his sympathizers. If this scandal deepens, some might see him as a cleaner alternative to you. Edward's hand tightened into a fist. Betrayal was never far in royal history. Cousins, brothers, even sons had turned against each other when power was at stake. Then we must move faster, Edward said. If James harbors ambitions, he must be shown that the path is closed, Lady Catherine interjected delicately. It would be unwise to confront him openly. That would give credence to the rumors of division. Instead, we must unify, at least in appearance. A carefully staged event, one that signals strength and solidarity. Edward's brow furrowed. A public show, then? Very well. Arrange it. But I want every word, every gesture choreographed. We cannot afford even the shadow of dissent. Lord Pembroke's voice cut through. But there is another matter. The foreign connections. They are not just rumors. Our sources confirm that funds moved through offshore accounts linked to less than reputable entities. Some of these names trace back to Russian oligarchs, others disturbingly to shadow corporations in Asia. The silence that followed was suffocating. Are you saying, Edward asked slowly, that we may indeed be compromised? Pembroke did not flinch. I am saying, Your Highness, that someone has worked very hard to ensure it appears that way. Whether or not the Crown was truly involved is irrelevant. Perception is reality, and perception has already begun its work. Edward's mind raced. He had always believed in the inviolability of the monarchy, that the throne stood above politics beyond corruption. But now the line blurred. If money could touch them, if influence could seep in unseen, what remained untouchable? Lady Catherine's eyes softened slightly. There is a way forward. We must root out the source, expose the manipulation before it consumes us. If it is foreign, then it is war, not of guns and armies, but of information of trust. And if it is internal... She hesitated. Edward finished her thought grimly. Then it is betrayal from within. The next morning, as dawn broke over London, the palace released a statement. It was brief, dignified, and deliberate, crafted to project calm. But behind the measured words, the machinery of crisis management spun furiously. Files were pulled, accounts traced, allies contacted in haste. In the corridors of Westminster, whispers grew louder. Was the monarchy truly entangled in foreign schemes, or was this the beginning of a coup by other means, a quiet dismantling of centuries-old power, dressed in the language of modern democracy? Far from London, in a discreet villa on the coast of the Mediterranean, a man watched the British news feed with a glass of wine in hand. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed satisfaction. The seeds he had planted were sprouting faster than expected. Britain was unraveling itself, and all he had to do was wait. For Edward, for Catherine, and for Pembroke, the storm was only beginning. And for the first time in generations, the monarchy's survival was not guaranteed. The battle ahead would not be fought with crowns and ceremonies, but with secrets, leaks, and the ruthless war for public belief. Part 4. The next morning dawned with an unusual stillness, a brittle quiet that even the palace guards could sense. The news cycle had turned violent overnight. Tabloids screamed headlines about betrayal, corruption, and whispers of a shadow network inside the royal household itself. Mainstream outlets tried to balance their words, but the momentum of speculation was stronger than any restraint. Within hours, the palace gates were crowded with reporters, their cameras aimed like weapons. Inside the Royal Communications Office, Eleanor stood with her team, exhausted from a sleepless night. The leaked documents had reached not just domestic papers, but also foreign media outlets with appetites for scandal. A single misstep in their statement could destabilize the monarchy's fragile relationship with its people. Every phrase was being dissected, every silence interpreted. "Yesterday, we fought to control the narrative," said Marcus, one of Eleanor's deputies, his voice hoarse. "Today, it feels like the narrative is controlling us." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. She had worked in this office for nearly a decade, navigating storms of misinformation and political intrigue. But this time felt different. The documents didn't just suggest corruption, they hinted at alliances with figures the public considered enemies of the state. If proven true, it would be catastrophic. If disproven, the damage of suspicion might already be irreversible. "We need to think strategically, not emotionally," Eleanor said firmly, scanning the room. "The monarchy has survived wars, abdications, and scandals. We will survive this too, but not by panicking." Across the city, the Prime Minister convened an emergency meeting. Advisors argued whether to publicly support the crown or distance the government from the palace until clarity emerged. Some feared that association could tarnish the government itself. Others believed that undermining the monarchy now would weaken the nation's stability. Meanwhile, in the digital sphere, the storm only grew. Hashtags calling for transparency trended alongside those demanding abdication. Conspiracy forums pieced together theories, some laughably wild, others disturbingly plausible. A grainy photo of the Queen's private secretary at an overseas conference resurfaced, suddenly reframed as evidence of collusion. Truth and fabrication intertwined, indistinguishable to the public eye. Inside the palace, the Queen's private chambers were dimly lit. She sat in silence, her hands folded neatly, her gaze fixed on the rain tapping against the windows. At her side, Eleanor presented the morning briefings, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Your Majesty, Eleanor began the situation is escalating faster than anticipated. Every hour without a direct response leaves room for dangerous interpretation. I recommend addressing the nation today." The Queen's eyes lifted sharp but weary. "And what shall I tell them, Eleanor? That their queen is accused of betrayal, that her household is painted as a den of traitors. Words will not erase doubt." "They won't erase it," Eleanor admitted, "but silence will feed it." A message of resolve, of transparency. "We must remind them that the monarchy is not hiding." The Queen studied her advisor for a long moment. "Very well. Prepare the address. But Eleanor, choose every syllable as if it were a blade. We may only have one chance to cut through this fog." As preparations began, an unseen figure moved in the shadows of power. The leak had not been accidental, it was calculated. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, in an office filled with screens and encrypted files, a man watched the chaos unfold. He had been waiting for this moment, planting seeds for years, ensuring the scandal would erupt when the monarchy was at its weakest. On one of the screens, he replayed Eleanor's press conference from the previous night. A faint smile tugged at his lips. He admired her composure, her defiance. But he also knew she was fighting a battle on terrain he had chosen. By afternoon, the Queen's address was broadcast live. Millions tuned in, televisions flickering in homes, pubs, and public squares. Her voice, steady yet tinged with gravity, filled the air. "My people, in these past days you have heard troubling accusations. Know this: the truth will not be hidden, nor will falsehoods be allowed to fracture the trust between crown and country. We will meet these claims with openness, with honor, and with the dignity that has guided us for generations. Together, we will not be divided." Applause erupted in some quarters, skepticism in others. Commentators debated endlessly. Yet for a brief moment, the speech seemed to calm the waters. The palace's media team worked tirelessly to amplify supportive reactions, to flood the digital space with positive narratives. But as night fell, new documents appeared online, this time even more damning. The leak was ongoing, a drip feed designed to exhaust defenses and keep suspicion alive. Eleanor watched the headlines refresh in real time, her stomach sinking. Whoever is behind this, Marcus whispered, they're not after just a scandal. They want collapse. Eleanor nodded grimly. Then collapse is what we must deny them, no matter the cost. And in that vow, she felt the weight of a history stretching back, centuries pressing upon her shoulders, an inheritance of duty, resilience, and survival. But she also sensed something new, that this was not just a battle for the monarchy's image, but for the very soul of the nation. The storm that had swept through the palace on the day of the exposé had not yet calmed. Whispers grew into loud murmurs across the continent. Newspapers carried striking headlines. Opposition leaders seized the opportunity to challenge the royal family, and foreign embassies quietly drafted cables filled with speculation. For the first time in centuries, the monarchy was not simply a symbol of continuity. It had become the subject of scandal, uncertainty, and political fire. Inside the royal residence, the family sat in a private chamber. The room, usually a sanctuary of tradition and quiet, now felt suffocating with tension. The king sat upright. His hands clasped, his usually steady eyes shadowed by fatigue. Beside him, the queen held her composure, though her grip on her teacup betrayed the strain. Their children, heirs to centuries of history, shifted uncomfortably, each silently asking the same question: what comes next? Outside the streets of the capital reflected the turmoil. Citizens gathered in public squares, some chanting in support of the monarchy, others demanding reform, or even abolition. The once unquestioned reverence had fractured, giving way to raw debate. Television pundits dissected every gesture of the king, every statement from the palace spokesperson, and every rumor that surfaced online. In the digital age, silence was no longer golden. It was damning. Within the Prime Minister's office, the situation was no less strained. Advisors surrounded the leader, laying out options that seemed more perilous than promising. A misstep could topple the government just as easily as it could further destabilize the monarchy. International markets watched nervously. Investors hated uncertainty, and the kingdom was suddenly drenched in it. Yet amid the chaos, an opportunity quietly emerged. Prince Adrian, the younger son, often overshadowed by his elder brother, found himself thrust into the spotlight. Unlike his father, he understood the power of immediacy in the modern world. He had long believed that the monarchy's survival depended not on secrecy, but on transparency. And now, when silence threatened to destroy what centuries had built, he decided to act. He appeared unannounced on a live broadcast, not from the palace's gilded halls, but from a modest study. The choice was deliberate. The setting was intimate, stripped of pomp and designed to feel close to the people. His voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "My family has made mistakes," he began. "We have been guarded sometimes to the point of seeming distant, but we are not above accountability. We serve the people. And today, I want to speak to you directly, not through statements, not through tradition, but through honesty." The effect was immediate. For the first time since the crisis began, the narrative shifted. The younger generation's willingness to confront reality, to acknowledge the failings of the past while promising reform, sparked hope. Social media lit up with reactions. Some were skeptical, others moved. Hashtags calling for abolition clashed with those expressing solidarity. The monarchy's survival was no longer a matter of heritage, but of adaptation. Meanwhile, in the royal council chamber, the king listened to his son's broadcast in silence. Pride and worry mingled on his face. The queen placed her hand gently on his, whispering, "Perhaps this is the path forward. Perhaps he can do what we cannot." But the path forward was fraught with danger. Powerful figures in politics and business who had thrived in the shadows of royal influence saw transparency as a threat. They began to scheme, their whispers growing into quiet conspiracies. The storm outside the palace was only one front of the battle. Inside the corridors of power, another war was beginning to take shape. Prince Adrian's decision had cracked the silence, but with that crack came light, and shadows alike. The future of the monarchy hung in a delicate balance, not between tradition and modernity alone, but between survival and downfall. And in the heart of the storm, one question loomed larger than ever: could truth save the crown, or would it destroy it once and for all? The midnight air of Washington carried a strange stillness, as if the city itself held its breath. Beneath the glow of the Capitol dome, journalists waited outside the committee chamber, phones in hand, broadcasting fragments of speculation to a restless world. Inside, the inquiry had shifted from the financial revelations of foreign influence to something far more volatile: the question of betrayal within the nation's own institutions. Chairwoman Reynolds tapped her gavel once, silencing the murmurs. We now move into the most sensitive portion of this hearing. Evidence suggests that not only money but also classified intelligence may have been compromised. Mr. Patel, please proceed. Kash Patel adjusted his notes, his voice measured yet sharp. The records indicate multiple classified briefings were accessed by unauthorized staffers linked to lobbying groups. What concerns us is not only the breach itself, but the timing. These leaks coincided with shifts in committee votes that favored foreign economic interests. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The weight of his words pressed down like a storm cloud. Was the corruption deeper than campaign donations? Were policies themselves being shaped by invisible hands overseas across the room? Representative Collins leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. Are you suggesting that sitting members of Congress allowed classified material to be funneled abroad in exchange for political support? Patel paused, then answered with deliberate calm. I am suggesting the possibility cannot be ignored. The data trails are there. Whether they acted knowingly or were manipulated is the question this body must pursue. The cameras zoomed closer. Every twitch of a brow, every tightening of a jawline became instant fodder for analysis. Social media feeds erupted. Half the nation demanded resignations, the other half screamed witch hunt. Yet beneath the frenzy, the threat was real. Leaked intelligence meant weakened defense strategies. Foreign governments watching from afar no doubt celebrated every revelation. The image of a fractured America suited their ambitions perfectly. In the back row, a young staffer named Lydia felt her pulse race. She had stumbled upon anomalies in communication logs weeks ago but had been too afraid to speak. Now Patel's testimony confirmed her worst fears. The cracks were widening, and the flood was coming. Quietly, she slid her phone from her pocket, drafting a message to her only trusted contact. If what she suspected was true, the rabbit hole went far deeper than anyone in the chamber imagined. Chairwoman Reynolds leaned forward, her voice steely. Mr. Patel, this committee will recess briefly before we continue. When we reconvene, we will require names. If members of this Congress are complicit, the American people must know. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the tense chamber. Outside, the crowd of reporters surged forward, their voices colliding in a chaos of questions. The story was no longer about campaign money or foreign influence. It was about treason, power, and the soul of a government on the edge of implosion. And somewhere deep in the labyrinth of Washington's shadow networks, the real puppeteers smiled. They had orchestrated chaos with precision, and whether exposed or not, the damage was already done. The Capitol lights gleamed against the night sky, but beneath the glow, America entered its darkest hour.